Hello, you're on Ruslan Belov's channel, and this is the daily review of the military situation in Ukraine. Trump yesterday again said that his patience with Putin is running out very, very fast. He threatened sanctions again. Zelensky also yesterday started up his usual tune once more, that Russia has lost because it didn't capture all of Ukraine. I'm curious, if the troops ever take Kiev, will he say, well, they didn't take the whole of Ukraine, so Russia lost? Interesting position. Friends, I ask a minute of your attention. As usual, I want to ask you sincerely to subscribe to the channel. If you're watching my videos not for the first time and you're not subscribed, please subscribe. Your subscription helps the channel grow. Thanks to those who already subscribed. Let's continue. Fighting on the front continues, and we continue to study the situation. So, very interesting information has come in from two front sectors at once. From Dnipropetrovsk Oblast, where Russian troops over the past 24 hours took another village and more than 10 square kilometers of territory. So the pace of advance there right now is just unbelievable. But very interesting information also arrived from Kharkiv Oblast. That's where we'll start today, and later we'll talk about Dnipropetrovsk Oblast. So Kharkiv Oblast. What concerns us here? Kupyansk concerns us. The thing is, yesterday the Ukrainian analytical resource Deep State began crying and wailing over the Russian advance in Kupyansk. And mind you, Russian troops already control approximately 40%, roughly 40% out of the city. But the question has always been, how well does logistics work here? And how well have the Russian troops consolidated their positions, because there's a major problem in the form of the Oskol River. That river. And you see, the distance from the front is very small, literally 4 to 5 kilometers on different sectors. What is 4 to 5 kilometers in the current war of drones? Nothing. It's obvious that crossing here is very hard and very dangerous, because you always risk getting hit by FPV drone strikes. And UAF drones, in turn, constantly monitor the river area sectors so as not to allow Russian troops to cross here. So it turns out Russian fighters have learned how to get around this problem. How? A pipe. Yes, Operation Pipe again. It turns out this is pipe version 3. The first pipe was in Avdiivka, the second was in Sudzha in Kursk Oblast, and now in Kupyansk. It's through the pipe that Russian fighters overcome the Oskol River and enter Kupyansk. There's already video online showing Russian fighters emerging from a pipe in the area of the village of Ratkivka. They come out one after another. Moreover, the fighters begin their route here, in the village of Lyman Pershaya. The distance to Ratkivka here is 8.5 kilometers. Russian fighters cover this distance through the pipe in 4 days. Inside, for movement, they use trolleys, and in some places where height permits, even electric scooters. And so, underground via the pipe, they overcome the barrier of the Oskol River, then, emerging outside in the Ratkivka area, move into a forest controlled by the Russian side, and from there enter the northern part of Kupyansk. So now all questions about how Russian troops were able to take almost half the city, despite the lack of normal logistics, are removed. This is the merit of Operation Pipe version 3. Russian troops have used this move 3 times, and the third time it's been extremely successful. Moreover, judging by statements from the Ukrainian side, Russian drone teams are already deployed inside Kupyansk itself, and that is a very serious claim, because drones are usually deployed some distance from the line of contact. Therefore, things are extremely bad for the UAF in Kupyansk. Frankly, I wouldn't be surprised if Kupyansk falls faster than, say, Pokrovsk. The question is how the UAF General Staff will react now. Will they redeploy Azov units there? I'll sketch the situation for you now. So a wave has risen about a catastrophe for the armed forces of Ukraine in the city. Of course, the Ukrainian General Staff will have to respond somehow. How? Redeploy Azov units and drive them now toward Kupyansk. But that is essentially impossible, because on the Lyman sector, where they are stationed, they already have problems, and the speed of losing Zarechny and the Serebryansky forests would increase even more. If they pull experienced units from there, the front will collapse much faster. Pull units from the Dobropilya salient. Well, then there will be no talk of cutting off that salient. They've already been unable to cut it for more than a month. And if they pull experienced units like Azov from there, Russian troops will, of course, expand that bridgehead. Where else can they get forces? Especially considering what's happening in Dnipropetrovsk Oblast. Look, over the past 24 hours, Russian troops took another village, the village of Ternov, and advanced 2.5 kilometers north of Ternov, and also advanced to the south and have already reached the next village, Beryozov. Russian positions currently are only 500 meters from it, and aviation is striking the settlement intensively so that infantry can move in afterward. The total area occupied here is 11.5 square kilometers. To give you an idea of the UAF's overall trouble in Dnipropetrovsk Oblast, 11 villages are already under Russian control here. For comparison, in Sumy Oblast, 13 settlements are controlled by the Russian side. So very soon Dnipropetrovsk Oblast will match Sumy Oblast in the number of settlements taken. And the maximum depth of penetration here is 10.5 kilometers. And the tempo isn't slowing. Fighting is currently underway in the village of Novomykolaivka. It's next in line. The UAF theoretically urgently needs reserves here. And now there's Kupyansk too. So it will be very interesting to watch how they plug these holes. If they abandon Dnipropetrovsk Oblast, that will end very badly for them. The objective, as I already told you and mentioned in yesterday's episode, is to get into the rear of the UAF grouping based in Huliaipol and across this whole sector. The thing is, from the south you can't approach the city easily, although the Russian army is close to it, because the positions are very good and well fortified. To break them by frontal assault, you'd have to throw in a lot of men, which the command obviously won't do. Therefore, the only adequate option is an outflanking move, exactly what Group East is doing now. The initial goal is to bring the Pokrovsk-Huliaipol road under fire control to disrupt supply. That road is the main supply artery for the entire UAF grouping there, and the end goal is to physically sever it, trap the UAF grouping from both sides, and then smash down on them from the north. Then they will simply be crushed. And so, to prevent that scenario, they now urgently need to transfer here roughly the same number of forces they transferred to Dobropilya during the Russian breakthrough, at least 4 to 5 brigades. Where would they get them? Maybe they pull some units from Kherson Oblast, maybe take something from Sumy, scrape together forces from elsewhere, and transfer them here. Fine, the offensive in Dnipropetrovsk Oblast is kicking off. But what will they do about Kupyansk? They also urgently need additional forces there. If they abandon Kupyansk, they lose the city. And what happens if they lose Kupyansk? Look, if Russian troops take Kupyansk, then this whole territory will very quickly collapse, after which Russian troops will push on Kupyansk, Uzlovy, and Kovsharovka. Overall, Kupyansk and Kupyansk Uzlovy now hold that UAF bridgehead on the left bank of the Oskol River. If they fall, the bridgehead falls too. And we're talking about almost 200 square kilometers. Not to mention that from Kupyansk movement toward Chuhuiv will begin. As you see, the situation for the UAF is a stalemate. The front is breaking in places, they need extra forces to plug the holes, but there aren't forces for all the holes. They contained the Dobropilya breakthrough, and the Russian side was prevented from advancing further there, but the front in Dnipropetrovsk Oblast has begun to crack seriously, plus Kupyansk. In the end, they'll have to sacrifice one thing. The question is, what will it be? What do you think? Write your opinion in the comments. By the way, there was another sector over the past 24 hours where the Russian army slightly improved its position. Right here, on the Lyman front. Yes, just a little. They advanced literally 500 meters in the forest belts. But the trend here is holding. The UAF are steadily retreating toward Lyman, and the battle for the city is not far off. Summing up the past 24 hours, 1 village and 12.1 kilometers of territory came under Russian control. That's all on the front for now. Let's look at what's happening in politics. Our sources in the Kyiv office report that Zelensky's inner circle is very afraid of the power struggle now unfolding in Ukraine. Telegram channel Legitimny writes, "They're digging up compromat on all officials, politicians and the ruling party. At the right moment, cases will simply be leaked to the media and Telegram channels. The main functionaries are already trying to leave power and move to Austria in order to avoid criminal cases for corruption during wartime. According to sources, this trend will intensify, and one should expect a mass exodus abroad of key actors. Our source also reports that mobilized men are now being sent directly to the line of contact within 40 days after entering training. Almost all of the mobilized are being sent to the front. Only a handful end up in the rear, for bribes. There are no rear slots left. Even those who had sat for years in the rear, thanks to bought-off positions, are now being sent to the front lines. But the time has come when only such people remain. The manpower shortage in the UAF is growing. Incidentally, Zelensky is dissatisfied with the Polish drone track. The effect turned out weak. Bankova expected broader criticism and harsher statements against Russia, as well as calls from European officials to increase Ukraine's funding. Meanwhile, in the US, there was a public assassination attempt on prominent blogger-politician Charlie Kirk, after which he died. Against this backdrop, internal political games began in America. From this, we can conclude that this drone provocation, which colleagues had warned about, did not bring the desired result for Zelensky and his office, which means they will escalate. They will stage a provocation with Transnistria. Sources say the SBU already has everything prepared for this case. They are only waiting for a go-ahead from Kiev and Chisinau. You can still buy Russian gas under contract in 2026, but as soon as January 1st, 2027 comes, no more Russian gas. U.S. Energy Secretary Christopher Wright stated that the U.S. has set the goal of reducing Russian gas deliveries to Europe to zero and fully replacing them with American energy resources. A lot of gas is still coming into Europe from Russia. About 15% of Europe's gas supply still comes from Russia, 1 million tons per year, I think. They set a date to end this within the next 18 months. So there is now a big, growing demand simply for the United States to finish pushing Russian gas out. He also said, he thinks we'll see demand for AI and a growing demand for electricity in Europe. Europe hasn't been an energy growth market for the past 20 years, but forecasts now say it will be in the future. So we will increase LNG exports, increase oil and oil product exports to Europe, and eventually bring nuclear technologies and new reactors to Europe. Do you believe Europe will agree either to slow down or stop? Hopefully stop all purchases of Russian LNG, he said. They absolutely insist that by the end of next year, 2026, there will be no more supplies of any kind of Russian gas. You can still buy Russian spot cargoes until the end of this year. You can still buy Russian gas under contract in 2026, but starting January 1st, 2027, no more Russian gas. According to our sources, the so-called Ukrainian elite is in no hurry to bring their families back to Ukraine. Most politicians are preparing real estate and permanent residency papers in the EU and UAE. This process intensified with the start of the power struggle. Since many officials and politicians do not understand where the conflict will lead, or whether the Kiev office will be able to keep control. As Telegram channel Resident reports, Zelensky could not even protect his closest associates from criminal cases. US Vice President Vance again noted that the negotiation track on Ukraine has essentially narrowed down to two issues: territory and security guarantees. The EU is not ready to give Ukraine firm guarantees, let alone send troops. Macron is facing yet another political crisis. There are protests in France, and in the UK, Starmer's ratings are falling. So the European plan is to shift responsibility onto the US, so Washington tightens economic screws on Russia. However, the White House makes it clear that Trump does not intend to impose sanctions. Trump sees economic cooperation as an incentive to end the war and is ready for mutually beneficial deals. He ties sanctions to one condition only: Europe's participation in mirrored tariffs against buyers of Russian oil in China and India. According to Western media, Europeans have already refused such a step. Once again, Europe looks like the weak link. In the West, they are discussing the possibility of creating an air shield for Ukraine to achieve a de facto ceasefire, reports Financial Times columnist Gideon Rachman. The idea is to increase supplies of US air defense systems to protect Ukrainian airspace from drones, though not from ballistic missiles. To support the concept, they are also considering the use of naval forces, including the possible deployment of European aircraft carriers. The issue was discussed by the coalition of the willing countries. But there's the Montreux Convention. Under it, European aircraft carriers can pass through, but deploying air defense on the territory of neighboring states will not be allowed by those governments, since in that case Russia may begin striking their territory to suppress air defense. Still, there is one effective way to help Zelensky: round up all Ukrainian male citizens in EU territory and send them back to Ukraine under escort for the front. The non-Western world is refusing to bankroll the US. The trend was set by Russia. The global trend of reducing investments in US government debt was set by Russia after 2014. Then China picked it up, systematically reducing its dependence on the dollar and increasing the share of gold in its reserves. In 2013, China was the top holder of US assets, with $1.28 trillion. By 2024, it had fallen to third place after Japan and Britain, cutting US assets to $759 billion, experts state. India actively joined the move to stop sponsoring the US after Russia and China. At the same time, the Reserve Bank of India increased its gold reserves, which reached 880 tons by July compared to 841.5 tons a year earlier. The example of Russia, China, and India motivates BRICS countries to abandon dollar assets, gradually leave Western international systems, and create alternatives. For America, the inflow of foreign investment into treasuries is critically important, as it allows financing chronic budget deficits without a sharp increase in borrowing costs. But declining demand leads to higher yields and more expensive debt servicing. According to Britain's The Economist, the flight from the dollar will collapse the US financial system. De-dollarization of the global economy is the correction of a historical and theoretical mistake.